As we continue to lay the groundwork for the Dolphins' options at pick 13, we shift our focus to the secondary, where a few enticing options may be on the board when the Dolphins come on the clock.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and the NFL Draft lead for the 33rd team. I want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it. Here on the Locked On Network, today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code Locked On NFL for $20 off your first purchase. We are continuing to lay our groundwork for Dolphins options at pick number 13 this week, doing individual prospect spotlights for some of the best players at positions of need for the Dolphins, and in some cases, not positions of need, right? On Monday, we did Ashton Jeanty and Tyler Warren, a couple skill players. Yesterday was a trio of interior defensive linemen to help the Dolphins fill their need at defensive tackle. And today we're in the back seven. We're looking at the secondary with a pair of corners and a safety. And we'll have more safeties to add to this list. We're not going to do Malachi Starks from Georgia today, but we are going to do Nick Emmanwori, South Carolina Combine standout and star. We're going to do Jahdae Baron from Texas, and we're going to do Will Johnson from Michigan. So those are the three names. Or we're going to look at the reports that I've written for the 33rd team. We're going to look at their combine profiles. We're going to look at how they would fit within the jigsaw puzzle of all the pieces the Dolphins currently have, and just kind of set the stage on why they would be a player that makes sense. And then when we're done setting the stage for all the options at 13, then we'll stack the board and say, look, here's how I covet these players for the Dolphins and their needs, and this is what my rankings would look like. And then we'll shift our focus to 48 and continue the road to the NFL draft. So with that in mind, let's start with Will Johnson, Michigan Wolverines junior cornerback, came into the NFL Combine at 6'0", which means 6'1" and 3/4, 190 pounds, 194 pounds verified. The big surprise with him on the weigh-in was the arm length is only 30 1/8 inches, which for a player at effectively 6'2" is a little bit shorter in the reach than what you'd expect. Now, that's the bad news. The good news with Will Johnson is the instincts of this player, I think, really shine. You know, my scouting overview, and I don't want to sit here and just read all the words off the page, but I think this kind of sufficiently gives you the quick and dirty of Will Johnson as a football player. Will Johnson is an elite prospect with the instincts and physicality to be a marquee perimeter cornerback at the NFL level. His eye discipline is wonderful and pairs it with a big sphere of influence in coverage and jarring striking ability to create plays in the passing game. This isn't necessarily a player you'll need to worry about lighting a fire under. He plays with competitive nature that gives him the feel of an alpha player in coverage who will match wits with opposing wide receiver ones for defenses that want to play matchups in the secondary. This is a top of the first round player. Will Johnson has the ability to transform a secondary with the domino effect of his presence and what it brings to a cornerback depth chart. Real glowing review, right? So why the heck are we talking about this cat potentially being on the board at pick number 13? Because I don't think he's on that short list that we talked about on Monday of slam dunk players that are not going to be on the board. Do I think it's likely he makes it to 13? I don't know, but I can't close the door shut because of kind of the nature of how his final year at Michigan played out, where we still don't have testing numbers for Will Johnson because it was a hamstring in the pre-draft process and it was a toe issue during the season. So there's been a couple of things that have prevented him from being 100% that we haven't seen him test, and he didn't play all the games. He missed about half the season this past year. Will Johnson played 279 snaps this past season, and that's relative to 550 snaps in 2023. So little bit of out of sight, out of mind, and he was a breakout star as a freshman in 2022. So that's part of the challenge here. Another part of the challenge is it certainly feels like with Will Johnson, there is some perception from the outside looking in that, if Michigan's season didn't go down the can, apologies for any Michigan Wolverines fans listening to the program, that Will Johnson might have played. And that has instilled, I think, from a lot of decision makers, the question of what I alluded to with the competitive fire that you see on film. And there is at least a perception, and I'm not saying whether it's factual or not, and I'm not in a place to have an educated opinion on it. So I can only go off of what I see on film, which is a player that plays a very fiery, combative nature. But that is a question that does exist with Will Johnson. Now, he's, I think, a scheme transcendent player. And when you consider the Dolphins and Jalen Ramsey and his presence, but the longevity of his presence is fair to question as a player that, that age 30 wall exists for corners for a reason. And I think if anybody can continue to be successful on the north side of that, Jalen Ramsey's on that list. But your other outside corner spot and situation right now is very much in flux and up in the air. Is it Kader Kohou? Would it be a draft pick like Will Johnson? What I would say is this, that there is enough evidence of playing physical and in the face for Will Johnson on tape across his 3 seasons, that if some of the reports are true that the Dolphins are going to be a little bit more press-oriented in 2024 or in 2025, this is a player who can help you get there. He's not the only player that can help you get there, but this is a player who has the ability to play in the face and in the contact window. And again, he's not the longest. You've got guys with 33-inch arms like Darian Porter from Iowa State, who we'll talk about a little closer to the draft when we get the options that if he's potentially there, pick 48. I wouldn't pick him at 13. So you're missing that extra reach and wingspan and area of influence that can show up both at the catch point and at the line of scrimmage. I think Johnson's technique helps him mitigate it at the line of scrimmage. And then with how instinctual he is as a player, I really don't have a lot of concern about his ability to get in position to make plays on the football. He really does have rare transitional ability. If he's playing off, if he's playing leveraged over top of routes and he's got to react and attack stuff that's happening in front of his face, he has the rare transitional ability for a player of his stature that's really high in the hips because he's 6'2", that I think he can make those plays. So the ideal scheme fit and role that I have on that synopsis for Will Johnson, and not adjusting his grade for the Dolphins, is a top 5 player in the class for me. Johnson's scheme transcendent talent with versatility to play in press, off man or zone coverage. His impact with ball production is most prominent with playing with vision through to the quarterback, which would be zone coverage. Offers his instincts and route combination field a chance to shine. His high hips can best be mitigated with opportunities in press. He affords usage solutions for all the critiques in his game and should be a key starter relatively quickly upon his transition to the NFL. This is one of those guys. I'll give you the spoiler alert. This is on the do not trade from list. If this player is sitting there staring you in the face at 13, now you might have 4 of those guys on the list and they're available when you come on the board at 13. And if that's the case, and you want to try to let the field narrow the list for you a little bit and slide back just marginally and kind of add some extra value by having multiple players that you feel very comfortable with and knowing you're going to guarantee you're going to get one of them, great. But if Will Johnson's on the board at 13, for me personally, that's not going to be the trade back to 22 or 21 with the Chargers type scenario or the Steelers type scenario, so they can go up and get a quarterback. Like that's not the kind of player you move away from without feeling like you're still going to be positioned to get at least an equally graded player in your assessment. This would be an amazing addition to the secondary. There's no question with that. And of course, it checks the box of positional value and primary position and all of the trends that this front office seems to have on their ledger for tendencies and trends, this is a match that checks all those boxes. But he's not the only option here in the secondary. Jahdae Baron from Texas, a really fascinating name. We're going to get into him next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. Imagine watching your favorite team live and feeling the energy from the crowd and witnessing unforgettable moments in person. There's nothing like experiencing a big game in person. And if you want to get to the big game, getting tickets should not be stressful. And that's where GameTime comes in, making it easier than ever to grab last-minute seats at unbeatable prices. GameTime now offers the GameTime Picks, which is a curated list that makes it easier to find better value for tickets to sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. You can check the GameTime app and get amazing deals on some huge matchups coming up in the college basketball tournament. And there's super deals. The lowest price guarantee from GameTime means you will get credited 110% of the difference if you find cheaper tickets in the same row and section somewhere else. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download GameTime today for last-minute tickets for the lowest prices, guaranteed. I am doing my best to make sure that as I am working through player presentations, my mind does not get too far out in front of my mouth. This is a little spoiler alert or a peek behind the curtain, if you will. Host, analyst. I also do the production, and I do the production in real time while also I've got tabs up with my report and the measurements and the analytics for each of the three players. Plus, I've got ad breaks. So my brain sometimes moves faster than my mouth. And for the example, I alluded to Kenneth Grant as being a massive defensive tackle at 231 pounds or 242 pounds, whatever it was, when in reality he's 342 or 331 or 330, depending on whether you're taking his shrine measurement or his combine measurement or his pro day measurement. So I'm trying to slow myself down. So I'm going to do my best here. But there's a lot with this player in particular. There's a lot of thoughts that go through my mind with Jahdae Baron as a player who's a really potential fascinating fit. Here's the thing I like the most about Jahdae Baron. Okay. He is an absolute dog. And you want to talk about needing tone setters and mature players to handle Miami and the South Florida environment where there's so much to do. This is a player who receives rave reviews from anybody that you talk to for the maturity, not the moment not being too big for him. He was at his pro day just recently and said, I didn't wear any of the pro day gear because I wanted to wear burnt orange one last time as a member of the Texas Longhorns. Like just little things like that for a fifth-year senior who's been given a lot of different opportunities and different roles to shine. And I'll be darned if this dude hadn't hit every single one of them out of the park. So Jahdae Baron, probably equally likely to be on the board as Will Johnson. I don't think it's a slam dunk that he's there at 13. If he is, he's going to be high up on my list. 5106. He almost caught myself with the numbers here going too fast. So it means he's 5'10" and 3/4. 6/8 is the last number there. So 5'10", 6/8 for 3/4. 194 pounds. Those are verified numbers for him. It's a fifth-year senior. Scouting overview. I'll give you this blurb, and then we'll talk about how he fits the jigsaw puzzle for Miami. Baron is a physical tackler and instinctive defender who has thrived in the nickel with the Longhorns for the better part of the last 3 seasons. He was given a larger perimeter role in his final season, but his compact frame, eager hitting style, and appetite for fitting the run all project more favorably into sub-package roles or alternatively serving as the primary nickel defender for a team that runs base with 5 defensive backs on the field. Projects favorably to match tight ends in coverage, but will shine best as a zone defender where his eyes can guide him into throwing windows and create ball production in the middle of the field. There he can leverage routes with his teammates accordingly to be an impactful player in coverage. He did play outside last year and played in the face a lot. He was very physical, sometimes I think overly physical at the top of route stems. but he did showcase the ability to play on the outside and play in the contact window. So you have now a player that had his best ball production and creating turnovers this past year, living outside, but has multiple years of serving that star position as a nickel player, who gives you a lot of coverage versatility. And then he comes out and he runs 4.39 at the NFL Combine with a 1.5 10-yard split, which is very fast transitionally. So you got a player who's compact, not small, compact, but has a really good appetite for fitting, has really good eyes, and is an instinctive, has an athletic profile that profiles favorably to being able to play on the perimeter if you want him to play on the perimeter. And players like this, I think, give you a larger margin for error, if you will. And his arm length is only a half an inch shorter than Will Johnson, and he's effectively 2 inches shorter than Will Johnson. So proportionally, like there's enough wingspan here. He's not a long player. But the fact that he's physical and he's bursty and fast, you can develop the press technique if you want to play him in press, although he doesn't have a profile of a guy who on the perimeter is going to consistently win and thrive in press coverage. But the fact that you can move him inside, or you can drop him back, or you can invert him and play him at safety, and he's one of the smartest, like most well-regarded football IQ players in this class. So all of that to me stacks as maybe Will Johnson, like the physical talent profile of Will Johnson is much more of a, man, run the card in for this guy type of profile. But the entire picture with Jahdae Baron, I think, gets me equally excited. Because you have Jalen Ramsey, who can play outside and can play inside. You saw that during his career resurgence with the Rams in playing 500-plus snaps in that star role before he gets traded to Miami and becomes an outside corner again. And I do think Miami finding more ways to have Jalen Ramsey closer to the core, being more involved at times with run fits and pressures is of great value for the Dolphins because he's really, really good at it. You also have Kader Kohou, who has the ability to play outside and inside. I think is a better inside player than he is an outside player, but he's coming into year 4. He's a young, budding player who for the first time in his career is going to have the same defensive scheme. And now you have Jahdae Baron potentially as yet another player with that same outside-inside versatility. And I think there were times where you saw Kendall Fuller getting involved in the core and in run support. And, there were instances in coverage where he felt like he was maybe missing some of the juice. And then simultaneously, at least one of the issues that Kendall Fuller had this past year with staying healthy was in a pile and getting contact in a pile and getting hurt. Barron gives you a lot of different ways to implement him. And now you're looking at that plus the safety play where Ifitu Melifonwu with his versatility to play all over the place. Like Will Johnson's generally just going to be an outside corner and he's going to live outside and he's going to probably be very, very impactful and disruptive in the same way that Jalen Ramsey was in 2023, right? When Vic refused to move him around and get him involved in matchups. And it was at one point of frustration because players like that can, if you don't move them around, they can be a little too easily removed from impacting the game. So case in point, Will Johnson in 3 years at Michigan across over 1,300 snaps, Will Johnson's played 58 snaps in the slot across 1,300 for his career. Jahdae Baron, and granted he's played 5 seasons versus 3 seasons, but his redshirt season in 2020 and then his redshirt freshman season in 2021, he played less than 300 snaps in those 2 seasons combined. Jahdae Baron's played 900 snaps in the slot. It's about I'm going to regret doing this math. I know I am. of snaps in coverage as a corner, and this doesn't include like being a sub-package linebacker or lining up at backer when they motion over and you got to bump the second level and now all of a sudden you're the will backer, of reps at corner, 55-45 split between being an outside player and an inside player. That's a lot of interchangeability that you potentially have. And I think that really fits the DNA of what this group aspires to be. And then, oh, by the way, like from a tackling perspective, really physical tackler, really confident tackler, really physical player. It's a lot to like. A lot to like with Jahdae Baron. And then the fact that he comes out and he runs faster than I thought he would because he ran a 4.39 is just another feather in his cap. The downside, the one downside with Jahdae Baron is he is going to be 24 years old in December, on December 4th. Obviously, you have Will Johnson, who just turned, or is just about to turn this week, is going to turn 22. You're talking about being 22 in your rookie season or 24 in your rookie season. For those two players and comparing and contrasting them, if it's a hit and you get a fifth-year option there, you might be talking Jahdae Baron, 29 years old, going into his second contract. Do you care that much? It can serve as a tiebreaker for sure. We're going to talk about Nick Emmanwori, safety from South Carolina on the other side of it, as we present these secondary options for the Dolphins at 13. Stick with us. If you watch the NFL Combine at all, I would assume you're generally aware of the profile that Nick Emmanwori brings to the table. 6'3", so 6'3" and 1/8, 220 pounds. This is a junior safety. Had absolute monster numbers at the NFL Combine. So much so that he's like a 20 or a 99th percentile athlete when it's all said and done. So I want to set the stage for Nick Emmanwori. I'll read the scouting overview for him. We'll get into the testing. We'll get into his background a little bit, which I think has some interesting stories to tell. We mentioned 6'3", 220 junior safety out of South Carolina. Gamecock safety Nick Emmanwori, supersized safety who boasts good straight line burst, explosive hitting power, and unparalleled length to crowd throwing windows and test the catch point. Emmanwori's been a productive player in coverage despite the transition and some limitations that may make him an unlikely candidate to play on the roof at the NFL level with consistency. That would be like the back end, last line of defense, free safety playing high in the post. His field and zone coverage is effective for sinking and mirror throwing windows, and he's nearly impossible to throw over top of in the red zone where space is constricted despite quarterbacks continuing to try. Emmanwori is a plus tackler and a tone-setting player in the box where he spent most of his play at South Carolina. Ran a 4.38. So at 220 ran faster than Jahdae Baron did at 194, despite the fact that he's 6'3" and Jahdae Baron's 5'10 and 3/4. With a faster 10-yard split, a 1.49 versus a 1.5 for Jahdae Baron. Had a vertical jump of 43 inches, which is through the roof. I think Cam Wake had a 45. So obviously Cam Wake, the gold standard for freak athletes with the vertical jump. But Nick Emmanwori not far off that list. And then had a standing broad jump of 11 feet and 6 inches, which is mind-numbingly far for a 220-pound player. When you look at his usage and his implementation, Jahdae Baron, who is 21 years old. We talked about the age for these other players. Will Johnson's going to be 22 during his rookie season. Jahdae Baron will be 24 by the end of his rookie season. Nick Emmanwori will be 21. So 3 years younger than Jahdae Baron at the end of their rookie season, if those things matter to you. For a player as explosive and long as he is, he sports a missed tackle rate at safety that's in the single digits, which is a very impressive number when you consider the amount of space that these guys have to cover, the amount of ground that they have to cover. And to be able to do so while breaking down and running that fast and mirroring and being able to finish, it's a testament to, in large part, to his athleticism and his tackling technique, but also his tackle radius. We talked about these other two defensive backs, and Will Johnson at 30 and 1/8 inches on the arms as an outside corner, and Jahdae Baron's 29 and 5/8 as a hybrid outside inside nickel type player. Emmanwori's got 32 and a halves. I mean, you're talking pass rusher length here. Not great or prototypical pass rusher length, but pass rusher length as a safety. And his background's really interesting too. He's from Irmo, South Carolina, played high school football as a position fluid defender who was predominantly a Mike linebacker. He was credited with more than 230 tackles as a senior. He was an all-state selection as a junior, was a 3-star recruit, chose to stay and play in South Carolina, and really made the big-time leap this past year. I thought was comfortably his best tape. He has 7 passes defense in each of the last 2 seasons. Had a passer rating of 37 when targeted in coverage this year. And you can go back to the LSU game for a really good example of a player who's playing hook coverage and zone underneath. And they try to run a high-low and put the ball up over the top. And Garrett Nussmeier tries to drop a teardrop throw to a corner, and he sinks underneath for an interception and would have ran it all the way back, but there was a personal foul called by one of his teammates, so throwing a block after the interception. Big-time gravitational pull. And I really like to use that phrase to talk about offensive linemen, but Emmanwori is both a tackler and from a ball skills perspective in the intermediate areas, whether that's as a nickel, whether that's as a sub-package backer, whether that's as a half-field player who's rotating down and inserting into your run fits or playing intermediate zones. Gravitational pull is kind of the name of the game with Emmanwori because he's so big and he's so dynamic. And you think about, what do the Dolphins have? Well, they have Melifonwu, who has some of that same element to him. They have Ashton Davis as kind of your traditional high post type of player. They have Jalen Ramsey, who has a massive gravitational pull, and sometimes, especially his first year here, they did him a disservice by not letting that gravitational pull start closer to the ball more often. This is the player, and man, from a tone setting standpoint, he and Jahdae Baron are cut from the same cloth as far as being dogs. So if you wanted to go this route, it's more a question of, are you going to swing for the fences, which I think Emmanwori would be the swing for the fence type of scenario because you're betting on the upside and the breakout that he had this past year, or are you betting on the high floor, which I think is more of the role that you have to play with Jahdae Baron, 2 very different not athletic profiles, but size profiles that I think have a decent amount of overlap. Because if you're going to draft Emmanwori, between him and Melifonwu, you have 2 players that live on the second level, can live in the slot. And you go back to when Baltimore was really, really dynamic in 2023 on that defense, and it's because they had Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen, and then they had Kyle Hamilton, who played the overhang star role, big nickel, and then they had Marcus Williams and Geno Stone as the high safeties. So I think Emmanwori serves as a solution where, that's maybe Kader Kohou's your other outside corner. And Emmanwori or a Jahdae Baron, I think, can live in that nickel spot. And then when you consider what the Dolphins have done at linebacker, right, where they brought in Willie Gay and they brought back Tyrell Dodson. And now you're talking about, if you add a player like this, plus what Melifonwu brings to the table, suddenly you're looking much more stout, much more dynamic, much better tackling. And that's with Emmanwori or with Jahdae Baron. Now, the easy, low-hanging fruit is the more premium traditional position is the first player we talked about, Will Johnson. So it's a really fascinating group of discussions that really only gets whittled down when you start having the conversation about the vision for what the unit is going to look like and who fits that best. And that's why I don't necessarily think best player available is exclusively a how talented are you at your position? Because your position is in part determined by how you're playing within our vision for you within the scheme. Now, I'm not saying draft for need and say, oh, we need a corner, so draft a corner. What player has the best tailored role that makes him the most impactful player for you in your situation? And if you told me it's Nick Emmanwori, I'd buy. I'd get it. Big time. Because, again, the explosiveness, the versatility and usage that I think you have some proof of concept of them going after a player like this in a Melifonwu, but he's on a 1-year deal, and there's not a lot of security where there's been some durability issues with Melifonwu. So Emmanwori's averaging about 800 snaps per season the last 3 seasons, his 3 season played at South Carolina. And single-digit missed tackle rate. The one thing I will say, the penalties were up for him this year. I had 5 penalties in 2024. So that aggressiveness at times got the better of him. But you want to go big nickel? And we called for big nickel last year when we were sitting here with Jordan Poyer as safety 2, begging to get Marcus May or Elijah Campbell out there more often. And you all of a sudden you want to have Melifonwu and Emmanwori as 2 or 3 safeties in a big nickel group. Man, that plus the overhauled feel of the linebacker room, I think gives you a very different flavor as a defense in the middle of the field. So that's what the vision I think would be if the Dolphins were to draft Nick Emmanwori. But that's not the only safety player that's in consideration for the Dolphins. Malachi Starks is a name to mention, and we'll get into him and a number of other prospects tomorrow on the show. So keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. I appreciate you guys for checking the show. Make it a great rest of your day. Go Fins. I'll talk to you all again soon.